Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack and the first coverage from Cloud Foundry Summit in Basel, Switzerland. I'm here with Chip Childers. Hey, Chip, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Basel is a great city.
Basel.
First time here. It's a great place.
Basel, Switzerland. And you have come here because this is really right the epicenter of Europe, isn't it? It's like, I mean, in terms of it's very much of a hub, a commercial center. You get easily here from different parts of Europe, and it's actually quite a city that's full of the arts. It's quite actually an interesting place to have a conference.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and we have such a outstanding Cloud Foundry community in throughout Germany and here in Switzerland with Swisscom and a number of the end users that are here. It's really great and central for them.
So Chip, you're the lead technologist really at Cloud Foundry Foundation,
yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so, in that role, you play a big part in really defining the direction. And so you made actually an announcement today that we did not anticipate, where Kubo is now almost like the core of, in many respects, of what you're now offering through the Cloud Foundry's platform and through the container runtime, which you're calling it.
Yeah.
Which now, so Kubo is now the Cloud Foundry container runtime.
Correct.
And it runs with the Cloud Foundry application runtime.
Yeah.
On Cloud Foundry Bosch. Let's break that down.
I think instead of focusing on the names to start, let's start with what are the end users looking to achieve?
Yeah,
right?
But I just want to make it. Yeah, we won't talk about. But I just think it's clear because we have been calling it Kubo up until now.
That's true.
And so we'll just say now that basically that was like pilot name, whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely.
And now we're moving into this new kind of. But now now we're talking about this. These new different. The runtime, the application runtime, and on Bosch. And so, yes, and so why don't we start with what you're saying about that experience?
Sure. So the naming is relevant only because it helps our community, it helps our downstream distributions understand and have a shared understanding of the importance of both the Cloud Foundry's traditional platform as a service experience, which most of our user stories are about how great that is at helping speed up development of software, but that also needs to be paired with other types of abstractions for developers. And
right.
There's some very clear use cases where you'd want to deploy containers directly.
Right.
So what we're seeing is that by combining different abstractions and supporting it in a very common way, we can help both the developer experience improve as well as the operator experience be consistent across the different capabilities they're trying to give to their development teams.
Right.
So traditional application development, that used to be very monolithic. Obviously, that's being broken down into microservices. People are, adopting the agile development processes. Cloud Foundry application runtime is designed to support that first and foremost, right? That developer experience is focused on fast time to get code shipped and deployed. Our container runtime takes the world, the best in class container scheduling software, Kubernetes. It focuses on that operational consistency and some of the power of the Cloud Foundry Bosch layer in terms of day two operations of the platform that we've got a great community that's been using it for all kinds of systems. It brings Kubernetes into that space. But the other work is really, it's ongoing. It's work to make sure that the developer interaction with both the Cloud Foundry application runtime and container runtime is seamless. So how can Kubernetes get more deeply integrated into the application runtime? How can they share backing services? And you've come to a number of our summits. We've talked a lot about the Open Service Broker API efforts. That was kind of step one in the process of getting these platforms to work well together and to have a shared marketplace of services behind them.
Okay, so let's talk about the technical architecture.
Sure.
Just so people may not have been familiar with how these services are integrating now. I think of it as like almost like a loosely coupled environment, and to some degree, where you're using Kubernetes as that infrastructure, and then running that with Bosch. So just help us understand what that technical architecture is.
Happy to. So let's specifically talk about what the Cloud Foundry Container Runtime does.
Yeah.
So let's first start with Cloud Foundry Bosch.
Okay.
That is a system for managing platforms.
Right.
Right. That's the way you can think of it. It's what abstracts all of the public cloud infrastructure options, all of the private data center infrastructure options, systems like OpenStack that are run both, by public providers as well as you can run it, within your own data centers. So Bosch abstracts that infrastructure. It also is focused on making it easy to manage these complex distributed platforms, right? Because you just think about Kubernetes. You have an etcd cluster, you have master nodes, you have all of the nodes that are going to host the containers. How do you do something like, for example, if a node goes offline, Kubernetes is going to do a great job of rescheduling any containers or pods that were running in that node. What allows a new node to be brought back online? That's where kind of Bosch comes into play. Its value is at the operator level. Now, once you're able to instantiate and manage Kubernetes clusters, you can start doing interesting things with them, right? Like you can, for example, expose the ability to create a Kubernetes cluster on demand directly to the development teams. So they can CF create service Kubernetes small, and then begin to load things like package software that might be delivered to them in a Docker container image format or an OCI image format. They can load data services that are born of the container era into those kube clusters that are deployed. So it opens up a number of different options for those development teams so that they can write their custom code, they can marry that with code or software they're receiving from others that runs really well on container platforms.
So for the people who may not know the history,
sure.
Bosch first was developed for Cloud Foundry through VMware several years ago, 5, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I'm trying to really date it back now. 2009, 2010.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Actually, no, it was 5 years old earlier this year.
Okay, so for people who may not be familiar with it, what exactly is Bosch? Tell us what it is, how it works. You reference it when you were just giving us kind of good answer there, but can you just give us a little bit more understanding of what Bosch is and why it's so critical?
Sure, absolutely. So first, a little history beyond the 5 years.
Okay.
The design of Bosch itself is directly descendant from Google's Borg platform. So Google runs a massive number of data centers, a huge amount of infrastructure, and they created a custom system to do that. It's called Borg. Bosch is a open source version of that. Kubernetes also, coming out of Google, was based on some of the basic design principles of Borg as well. And so they both have a very shared lineage. But what matters is that they have slightly different concerns. So Kubernetes doesn't work with infrastructure. It's run in hosts, and it supports containers, being deployed into it. What Bosch does is it looks down into the infrastructure and says, give me an API, and it will take responsibility for provisioning any of the software that you want within that infrastructure. And so it provisions Kubernetes, as an example. It provisions the Cloud Foundry application runtime components, as an example. It does that. It really has a very, very simple architecture at the high level. There's a thing called a Bosch director. It's the controller. It's the control plane. It talks to the different infrastructure options based on this thing called the CPI, or the Cloud Provider Interface, which maybe is misnamed because it's not just clouds. It's also vSphere and a number of private infrastructure options. And it consumes really two different YAML file artifacts. So one of them is the Bosch release of the software that you want to be deploying. Right? So that's what is the software, what is the configuration that we're going to want to have on the various nodes. It clusters them into the concept of jobs. Right? So jobs is the abstract metaphor. And the second thing that you combine is what's called the deployment manifest. So the deployment manifest says how many nodes of each job do I want to have deployed, and what are some of the rules and configurations that I want to put in place in terms of the amount of storage, the instance sizes. And so Bosch looks at that and says, this is a declarative model that I now understand as the Bosch director, and my job is to make that happen. Right? So very similar to, again, what Kubernetes does when someone says, run n number of this pod, it will, in a very declarative way, say, great, and a control loop will begin that will make that happen. So it will converge on what you've declared. Bosch operates the same way.
Okay. So Bosch is really, is obviously then core to, Cloud Foundry and has a lineage there. How does it fit into then this new model that we're seeing where containers are rapidly becoming the way to, build microservices, for example? What are the use cases that are going to emerge, that you're seeing emerge now, that makes this important, that makes the Cloud Foundry runtime, that you guys are talking about today so critical?
Yeah, the container runtime.
Container runtime,
right? So
what did I call it? I called it the.
Well, you just said Cloud Foundry runtime. So two runtimes.
Yeah.
One is the application runtime, and that's the PaaS experience.
Right.
Then there's the container runtime.
Yes.
Which is managed Kubernetes.
Yes.
That container runtime is designed to solve the exact use case that you just mentioned, right? There's a lot of Linux container software that's being developed and distributed as Linux containers. And this gives enterprises that are adopting the Cloud Foundry suite of software a target to land those. And they know that it's well managed, because not only are they getting the benefit of Kubernetes managing the containers that are deployed, but they get the benefit of CF Bosch underneath it, ensuring that Kubernetes is healthy. Okay.
So tell us then, what is the what is the path then for this infrastructure that you announced today, essentially?
Yeah.
What is it that you're looking to achieve here, for the community?
Well, I think that what's most important right now is thinking about, we're always focused on the developers.
Right.
So what is it that the developer in the enterprise needs? That developer experience is the most important thing, bar none, in our minds. Everything else flows from that. Oftentimes, some of these projects are open source infrastructure projects, tend to be very infrastructure focused. So they think about speeds and feeds up, and eventually they find the application, right? The Cloud Foundry community overall looks at it as development team, developer experience, and then looking down. So what we expect to have happen that's going to emerge out of our open source community is that we're going to begin to see a lot of the adoption of Kubernetes sitting next to the Cloud Foundry application runtime, so container runtime and app runtime sitting next to each other, which is also going to necessarily cause an improvement in the integration options that are available for things like shared identity between Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry application runtime.
So tell me then, what will it do today that is not that's not been possible, or just hasn't been as easy to do, now that you have this new capability?
Yeah, so I think it opens up a number of different possibilities. The one thing that I would say for an enterprise that already has the Cloud Foundry application runtime in place, they're using Bosch to manage that. Very frequently, and I'll use Bloomberg as an example, because they were the initial customer of Pivotal when Pivotal partnered with Google to create what was the Kubo project, and now the container runtime. They also had a number of data services that they were managing with Kubernetes, but they had a management problem. How do I actually manage Kubernetes? So that was like number one, right? The operator. And then number two was, how do I then ensure that the data services that I'm deploying into Kubernetes are easily accessed from apps that we're pushing into the application runtime? So it's really about the operational consistency and then the developer experience being much more integrated. We're seeing things like a service broker to instantiate Kubernetes clusters on demand being created. So that uses the container runtime. It uses the Open Service Broker API. It can then expose that into the application runtime, so you can literally type CF, create service, Kubernetes. That development team gets a Kubernetes cluster, and they know it's going to be managed just like the databases that they would have asked for in the same way in the past.
So what we're seeing is, we're seeing this a lot across the market. We're seeing we talked to, for instance, Microsoft quite a bit at the Open Source Summit, and they're all about this developer experience, right? Yeah. There's also been other, I've been seeing other accounts of people saying that Kubernetes, if you want to just install Kubernetes on your own, good luck. I hope you have the technical talent to do that. It's a technical challenge. It has been to this point, but now, probably it's getting easier to some extent. But there's this abstraction happening, right? So what does that abstraction mean to you? What is happening what is happening to these ecosystems now that we're seeing Kubernetes mature, but also these other services starting to come almost together in this abstraction and make the developer experience possible?
Yeah, so I'd actually say two things. So first, installing a platform like Kubernetes or Cloud Foundry application runtime, that's typically not the biggest problem.
That's not the hardest problem.
The hardest problem is day two, right? You got it. So that happens to be what the container runtime project is all about. Yes, it instantiates it, but more importantly, it cares for it for you, right? It makes it easier to scale it. Supporting rolling updates is really important. So I just wanted to make sure that was a pretty clear point.
Yeah.
The second thing that I'd say is, what does it mean that we have all of these great open source technologies? We're all starting to blend, they're converging.
Yeah.
Why does that matter? Well, I think it matters because we're seeing co-innovation happen where the vendors involved and the users that are getting involved are all working together to create what I see as an emerging larger platform of open source software that really is going to dominate the technology space for decades to come. And it really is, it's going to be a combination of these projects. And it's not just Cloud Foundry application runtime and Bosch and Kubernetes, but it's new and younger projects like Istio, which just had their 0.2 release, right? Very early on, but enormous potential for a shared service.
Huge potential.
Right? So all of these components are starting to come together. We're starting to see we're starting to see which platforms are best in class for what they do. We're starting to see where they can complement each other effectively, where we can start blending architectures together. It's opening up a world of possibility for the users, and frankly, it allows for options. You can work with multiple cloud providers using this open source software, and if they offer it as a service, then you get some consistency there. So it's a bright future.
You also announced Foundry.
Yeah, our marketplace. Marketplace.
Which speaks a little bit of what we're talking about here.
It does.
Because if you want to scale out, you're going to need to be able to the term that was used a lot, I think, in the earlier part of this, of this movement that really, I think, began several years ago, was about glue, right? How do you glue these services together, right? Because that was like the trick. How do you connect all these different services? And now it seems like we're moving into this next generation where it's getting a bit easier because the cloud service providers have stood up to some degree and have said, yeah, we're going to abstract it. So if you are using Jenkins, you can use Jenkins. Don't worry about it, right? If you're going to be, we're going to adopt Terraform because, Terraform just actually has, templates across 30 different platforms, right?
Yep.
So it seems like what we're seeing is kind of this extension of that kind of discussion, at a scale, and it's, to me, kind of almost symbolizes what you guys are talking about today.
Yeah, a bit. So the Foundry for the audience is it's the Cloud Foundry marketplace, for lack of a better term. What we wanted to do was to create a place, very simple. It's on it's a website, but we really wanted to create a place that made it easy for a user of Cloud Foundry or a prospective user of Cloud Foundry, and that's inclusive of application runtime, container runtime, as well as CF Bosch. We wanted to make sure that those users or potential users had a place to go to see how deep our ecosystem is. And it's not just technology that can integrate, it's also our training partners partners. It's also the systems integrators that know how to work with the various distributions of Cloud Foundry, know how to work with the different services that can be tied into it. So that's really what the Foundry is. It's the place to go. You can discover where the distributions are. You can discover what backing services they make available. You can discover the backing services that are available across the distributions. And really also go find the help, the people that can help you change your organization.
Well, Chip, this has been great. I have a more clear understanding of what you guys are talking about this morning and how the foundation is moving forward and helping think through kind of these trends we're seeing across the market and how they apply to the Cloud Foundry community. So thanks for taking the time.
Great. I was happy to be here.
Great.
Thanks a lot, Alex.